Strict parents turned me into master liar to survive impossible rules, but confessing everything destroyed my family and trapped me worse than before. Growing up in my household meant living under a microscope. My parents weren't just strict. They were military-level disciplinarians who monitored every aspect of my life with the intensity of prison guards. Every minute of my day was accounted for, every friend was vetted, every activity was approved or denied based on their impossibly high standards. "We're not raising a child," my father would say. "We're molding a future leader. Excellence requires sacrifice." My mother nodded in agreement. Other parents let their children run wild and wonder why they fail in life. "We're giving you structure and discipline that will serve you forever." Their rules weren't just numerous, they were absolute. No phone after 8 p.m., no friends over without prior approval and supervision, no extracurricular activities unless they directly contributed to academic achievement, no dating until college, no social media, no movies rated above PG, no music with explicit lyrics, no staying out past 6 p.m. on weekdays or 8 p.m. on weekends. The consequences for breaking any rule were severe and immediate. Grounding for weeks, removal of all privileges, extra chores, and lengthy lectures about responsibility and character. My parents believed that any deviation from their standards was a character flaw that needed to be corrected through punishment. "We're not your friends," my mother would remind me whenever I protested. "We're your parents, and our job is to ensure you become a successful, moral adult." But their definition of success was suffocating. Perfect grades weren't enough. I needed to be valedictorian. Playing an instrument wasn't enough. I needed to win competitions. Volunteering wasn't enough. I needed to demonstrate leadership and initiative. By the time I was 14, I'd learned that honesty was a luxury I couldn't afford. Telling the truth about anything meant opening myself up to judgment, criticism, and additional restrictions. So I started lying. It began with small deceptions. When they asked if I'd finished my homework, I'd say yes even if I had one assignment left. When they asked what we discussed in health class, I'd omit the parts about sex education that would have triggered a 3-hour lecture about moral decay. "How was school today?" became a daily exercise in creative fiction. I'd craft sanitized versions of reality that avoided any topics that might concern them. If a classmate made a joke about drinking, I'd leave that out. If a teacher mentioned current events they might find objectionable, I'd skip that part. The lies became more sophisticated as I got older. When my best friend Katie invited me to a sleepover, I knew my parents would say no because her parents were divorced, which they viewed as a moral failing. So I told them I was studying at the library and staying late for an academic competition meeting. "It's wonderful that you're so dedicated to your studies," my mother said approvingly. "This is the kind of commitment that will get you into Harvard." The guilt was overwhelming at first. I'd been raised to believe that honesty was one of the most important virtues, and here I was lying to my parents daily. But the alternative was living in a prison of their making, missing out on every normal teenage experience. The library became my alibi for everything. Staying late to study provided cover for hanging out with friends. Academic meetings explained weekend activities. Study groups justified social interactions they wouldn't normally approve of. "Emma is such a serious student," I overheard my mother telling a neighbor. "She practically lives at the library. We're so proud of her dedication." If only she knew that studying at the library meant going to movies, hanging out at the mall, and experiencing the normal teenage social life they'd forbidden me to have. The lies multiplied exponentially. Every deception required additional deceptions to maintain the illusion. When Katie's mom drove us to the mall, I had to explain why I smelled like food court pizza. When we went to a PG-13 movie, I had to research the plot of a documentary playing at the same time in case they asked questions. I became a master of preparation. Before every outing, I'd study the locations I was supposedly visiting. If I claimed to be at the library, I'd memorize the layout and current exhibits. If I said I was at a study group, I'd research the topics we were allegedly discussing. "Tell me about the colonial history presentation you worked on," my father would quiz me over dinner. I'd launch into a detailed description of a project that didn't exist, complete with historical facts I'd memorized just in case. He'd nod approvingly, proud of my scholarly pursuits. The worst part was that I was actually becoming an excellent student in the process. All the research I did to support my lies was expanding my knowledge base. My grades improved because I was genuinely learning about the subjects I claimed to be studying. "Your dedication is paying off," my mother observed when my GPA reached 4.0. "This is what happens when you prioritize education over frivolous social activities." But maintaining the lies was exhausting. I had to remember every story I'd told, every detail I'd invented, every excuse I'd given. I kept a hidden notebook where I recorded my fictional activities, studying it like lines for a play. The social media ban made lying easier in some ways and harder in others. I couldn't accidentally post something that contradicted my stories, but I also couldn't keep track of what my friends were doing online. I'd show up to school completely out of the loop about events that everyone else had seen on Instagram. "Why don't you have social media?" my classmates would ask. "My parents think it's a waste of time," I'd say, which was actually true. true. That sucks. How do you know what's going on? I prefer real-life interactions, I'd reply, making it sound like a choice rather than a restriction. But the isolation was taking its toll. While my friends shared inside jokes from online conversations and planned activities through group chats, I was always one step behind, piecing together social dynamics through overheard conversations and lunch table discussions. Junior year brought new challenges. Dating became a topic of constant conversation among my friends. But my parents' ban on romantic relationships until college meant I couldn't participate in this normal aspect of teenage life. When Michael from my chemistry class asked me to the winter formal, I wanted desperately to say yes. He was kind, smart, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. But attending a school dance was absolutely forbidden under my parents' rules. I'd love to go, I told him, but my parents won't let me date until college. That's crazy, he said, looking genuinely shocked. You're 17. I know, they're really strict about academics coming first. What if it wasn't a date? What if we just went as friends? I was tempted, but I knew my parents wouldn't see any distinction between a date and going as friends to a formal dance. I'm sorry, I said, I can't. That night, I cried in my room, mourning the normal teenage experiences I was missing. All around me, my classmates were learning how to navigate relationships, how to interact with the opposite sex, how to handle social situations that would be crucial for adult life. I was being kept in a bubble that was supposedly protecting me, but was actually leaving me completely unprepared for real-world social interactions. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to that dance, and my parents were never going to know about it. The planning required military precision. The dance was on a Saturday night from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. I told my parents I was attending a special academic symposium at the university that ran from 6 p.m. to midnight, followed by a sleepover at Katie's house to continue discussing the presentations. This sounds like an excellent opportunity, my father said when I described the fictional event. University-level academic exposure will strengthen your college applications. I felt sick lying to them, but I was desperate for one night of normal teenage experience. Katie's mother agreed to help with the cover story, though she was horrified when I explained my parents' restrictions. They don't let you go to school dances? She asked incredulously. Honey, that's not strict parenting, that's controlling. They just want me to focus on my education, I said, defending them out of habit. There's a difference between encouraging academic success and isolating your child from normal social development, she replied gently. The night of the dance, I followed my elaborate plan perfectly. I left home at 5:45 p.m., supposedly heading to the university symposium. Instead, I went to Katie's house, where she helped me transform into someone my parents would never recognize. Katie had borrowed a dress from her older sister, a beautiful navy blue gown that made me feel elegant and mature. She did my makeup and hair, creating a sophisticated look that was worlds away from my usual conservative appearance. You look amazing, she said as I stared at myself in the mirror. You look like yourself, like who you actually are when you're not trying to be perfect for them. The dance was everything I'd imagined and more. Michael looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, and he treated me with the respect and kindness I'd been craving. We talked, laughed, and danced to songs I'd never been allowed to hear at home. You're different tonight, he said as we swayed to a slow song. More relaxed, more real. This is me, I said. The real me that my parents don't know exists. For 4 magical hours, I experienced what it felt like to be a normal teenager. I wasn't the perfect academic machine my parents had molded. I was just Emma, a 17-year-old girl having fun with her friends. But the evening couldn't last forever. At 11 p.m. sharp, I changed back into my conservative clothes and headed to Katie's house for the supposedly continued academic discussion portion of my cover story. Did you have fun? Katie asked as she helped me remove the makeup. The most fun I've ever had, I said, and it was true. That night started an avalanche of increasingly elaborate deceptions. Having tasted freedom, I couldn't go back to the suffocating restrictions of my normal life. I began creating complex webs of lies that allowed me to experience pieces of normal teenage existence. I told my parents I'd joined the academic decathlon team, which required extensive evening and weekend practice sessions. In reality, I was hanging out with friends, going to movies, and slowly learning how to navigate social situations I'd been sheltered from my entire life. The fake academic activities required incredible attention to detail. I researched real academic competitions, memorized sample questions, and created fictional teammates and coaches. I even staged fake practices where I'd actually study competition materials just in case my parents ever checked on me. How did the practice session go today? My mother would ask. Really well. We're working on American literature questions for next month's regional competition. Did you know that Nathaniel Hawthorne originally wanted to be a lawyer? I'd respond with genuine facts I'd learned while creating my alibi. That's fascinating. You're learning so much through these academic pursuits. If only she knew that the academic pursuits were fictional and I was actually learning about life, relationships, and normal human interaction. The lies became a full-time job. I had detailed calendars of fictional events, backup stories for every situation, and contingency plans for unexpected questions. I studied my own deceptions with the same intensity my parents demanded for my actual schoolwork. But the deeper I got into the web of lies, the more isolated I felt from my family. Every conversation was a performance, every dinner was an acting exercise. I was living a double life so completely that I started to lose track of who I really was. Senior year brought new complications. My friends were making plans for prom, graduation parties, and senior week activities. I wanted desperately to participate, but each event required increasingly sophisticated lies to attend. Prom was the biggest challenge yet. It was impossible to disguise a formal dance as an academic activity, and it would require me to be out until 2 a.m. But I'd been dreaming of prom since freshman year, and the thought of missing it because of my parents' arbitrary rules was unbearable. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez, my Spanish teacher, mentioned that she was chaperoning a language immersion retreat the same weekend as prom. It's an overnight trip to practice conversational Spanish, she explained to the class. Students stay in host families and participate in cultural activities. The retreat was real, but I wasn't signed up for it. However, it provided the perfect cover story. I told my parents I'd been selected for this exclusive academic opportunity, which would require me to be away from Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. This is exactly the kind of enrichment experience that will set you apart in college admissions, my father said proudly. You've really proven your dedication to academic excellence. The guilt was overwhelming, but I pushed it aside. I was 18 years old and had never been to a school dance, never had a real date, never stayed out past my parents' arbitrary curfew. I deserved one night of normal teenage experience. Prom was magical. I felt beautiful, confident, and free in a way I'd never experienced before. Michael and I had been dating secretly for months, meeting at study sessions and academic meetings. Being able to spend an entire evening together as a real couple was incredible. I wish we didn't have to hide, he said as we danced. I wish I could just pick you up at your house like a normal boyfriend. Someday, I promised, once I'm in college and away from their control. But that someday felt impossibly far away. I was trapped in a system of my own making, where every moment of happiness required elaborate deception. The lies were affecting every aspect of my life. I couldn't share my real experiences with my parents, couldn't be honest about my relationships or interests, couldn't even express opinions that might contradict their worldview. I was living as a stranger in my own home. The breaking point came during the summer before my senior year. My parents announced that they'd arranged for me to attend a prestigious academic summer program at a nearby university. This will give you college-level exposure and strengthen your applications, my mother explained. You'll attend classes 5 days a week and spend evenings and weekends studying. The program was real and academically excellent, but it would mean giving up my entire summer of freedom. No more secret outings with friends, no more time with Michael, no more opportunities to be myself. What about my current commitments? I asked carefully. The academic decathlon team has summer training sessions. You'll have to drop that, my father said dismissively. This university program is more prestigious and will be better for your future. In one casual decision, they destroyed the fictional framework I'd built my social life around. Without academic decathlon as my cover story, I'd have no way to maintain my relationships or continue experiencing normal teenage life. That night, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. Instead of attending the university program or continuing with my elaborate lies, I was going to tell them the truth about everything. I spent 3 days preparing for the conversation, writing down everything I wanted to say, all the lies I needed to confess, all the experiences I'd hidden from them. I practiced explaining why I'd felt forced to deceive them, how their restrictions had damaged our relationship, how much I'd missed out on because of their controlling behavior. On a Tuesday evening after dinner, I asked them to sit down for a serious conversation. I need to tell you something important, I began, my hands shaking with nervousness. I've been lying to you about a lot of things, and I think it's time for honesty. Their faces went from curious to concerned to angry as I systematically dismantled every lie I'd told over the past 4 years. I confessed about the fake academic activities, the real social events I'd attended, the boyfriend they didn't know about, the normal teenage experiences I'd been hiding. The academic decathlon team doesn't exist, I admitted. I made it up so I could spend time with friends and experience normal social activities. You've been lying to us for 4 years? My mother asked, her voice deadly quiet. Yes, but I felt like I had no choice. Your rules are so restrictive that honesty would have meant missing out on everything normal teenagers do. Normal teenagers don't need to lie to their parents, my father said coldly. Normal parents don't forbid their children from attending school dances or having friends over, I shot back. The conversation exploded from there. They were furious about the lies, hurt that I'd deceived them, and convinced that their strict parenting had been completely undermined by my dishonesty. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed to give you structure and discipline, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. You've thrown it all away for parties and boys and meaningless social activities. Those activities weren't meaningless to me, I said. They were the only chances I had to be a normal person instead of the perfect robot you wanted me to be. We wanted you to be successful, my father replied. We wanted you to have opportunities and advantages that most children don't get. You wanted me to be a trophy you could show off to other parents, I said. You never cared about what I wanted or needed. But as the argument continued, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Instead of understanding why why I'd felt compelled to lie, they focused entirely on the deception itself. In their minds, my lying proved that their strict rules had been necessary and justified. "This is exactly why we had those rules," my mother said. "We could tell you weren't trustworthy. We knew you needed extra supervision and structure." "No," I said desperately. "The rules created the lying. If you'd been more reasonable, I wouldn't have needed to deceive you." But they weren't listening. In their worldview, children who lied were fundamentally flawed, and the solution was more restrictions, not fewer. The punishment was swift and severe. They immediately implemented new rules that made their previous restrictions look lenient. No friends at all, not even for legitimate academic purposes. No activities outside of school and homework. No phone except for emergencies. No internet access except for schoolwork under direct supervision. "Since you've proven that you can't be trusted with basic freedoms, you'll have to earn them back slowly," my father announced. "Maybe by the time you graduate, you'll have learned the value of honesty and responsibility." But the worst part wasn't the new restrictions. It was the complete breakdown of our relationship. They looked at me differently now, like I was a stranger who'd infiltrated their family. Every conversation was filled with suspicion and disappointment. "I don't even know who you are anymore," my mother said during one particularly painful dinner. "The daughter we raised would never have lied to us like this." "The daughter you raised was suffocating under your control," I replied. "I am who I've always been. You just never bothered to get to know the real me." Senior year became a nightmare. My parents monitored everything I did with obsessive intensity. They drove me to and from school, checked my homework every night, and called the school daily to verify my attendance and behavior. My friends tried to understand, but the gulf between their lives and mine had become insurmountable. While they were experiencing the freedom and independence that should come with being 18, I was living under tighter restrictions than I'd had as a middle schooler. "Can't you just wait it out until college?" Katie asked when I explained why I couldn't attend graduation parties or senior week activities. "I don't think they're going to let me go away to college anymore," I said miserably. "They're talking about having me attend the local community college while living at home." The college situation was the final devastating blow. I'd worked my entire high school career toward getting into a prestigious university, and I'd been accepted to several excellent schools with partial scholarships. But my parents now viewed college as another opportunity for me to lie and deceive them. "We can't trust you to make good decisions on your own," my father explained when I begged them to reconsider. "Living away from home clearly isn't appropriate for someone with your character issues." "My character issues?" I said incredulously. "You mean my desire to have normal human relationships and experiences?" "Your willingness to lie and manipulate people who love you," he corrected. "That's a serious character flaw that needs to be addressed before you can handle adult responsibilities." But the most painful realization was that my confession had made everything worse, not better. Instead of opening a dialogue about their restrictive parenting, it had convinced them that they hadn't been strict enough. Instead of helping them understand my perspective, it had validated their belief that I was fundamentally untrustworthy. The lies I'd told to protect my sanity and experience normal teenage life had been used as evidence that I was manipulative and dishonest. The very skills I'd developed to survive their controlling behavior were now being cited as proof that their control had been necessary. I started seeing a school counselor, desperate for someone who might understand my situation. Mrs. Anderson listened to my story with growing concern. "What you're describing isn't normal strict parenting," she said gently. "Forbidding all social activities, monitoring your every move, isolating you from peers, these are signs of emotional abuse." "But they love me," I protested automatically. "They just want me to be successful." "Love doesn't mean controlling every aspect of someone's life," she replied. "Healthy parents want their children to develop independence and social skills, not just academic achievement." Mrs. Anderson helped me understand that my parents' behavior was abnormal and that my lying had been a survival mechanism, not a character flaw. But she also warned me that confronting abusive parents rarely leads to positive change. "Controlling people don't usually respond well to having their control challenged," she explained. "They typically increase restrictions rather than examining their own behavior." She was right. My honesty had backfired spectacularly, making my life worse rather than better. I'd naively believed that truth and communication could solve our problems, but I'd failed to understand that my parents saw our relationship as a hierarchy, not a partnership. The final months of high school passed in a blur of misery and resentment. I attended classes, did homework, and followed their rules with robotic compliance, but the joy had gone out of everything. I'd lost my friends, my boyfriend, and any hope of experiencing normal teenage milestones. Graduation day was particularly painful. While my classmates celebrated with parties and gatherings, I went straight home after the ceremony. My parents were proud of my academic achievements, but the victory felt hollow when I couldn't share it with anyone who truly knew me. "We're very proud of how you've turned your life around this year," my mother said as we drove home from graduation. "This is the daughter we always knew you could be." But I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a shell of a person, going through the motions of being the perfect child they wanted while dying inside from the isolation and control. The summer before college was the darkest period of my life. My parents had indeed decided that I would attend community college while living at home, despite my acceptance to better schools. They justified this decision as helping me rebuild trust and learn responsibility before allowing me more freedom. In a few years, when you've proven that you can be honest and make good decisions, we'll reconsider letting you transfer to a 4-year university, my father explained. A few years. They were planning to keep me trapped in the system for years longer, using my teenage lies as justification for continued control over my adult life. That's when I realized the full scope of what my honesty had cost me. By confessing my lies, I'd handed them a weapon they would use to control me indefinitely. Every future attempt at independence would be met with reminders of my dishonesty and character problems. I'd been caught in a trap of their design. Their impossible rules had forced me to lie, and my lies had now been used to justify even more impossible rules. The cycle was complete, and I could see no way out. On my 18th birthday, sitting in my childhood bedroom with no friends to celebrate with and no future plans beyond the community college they'd chosen for me, I finally understood the truth about strict parents and lying children. They hadn't created rules to protect me or help me succeed. They'd created a system where honesty was impossible and dishonesty was inevitable. Then they'd used my inevitable dishonesty as proof that their system was necessary. The lies they'd forced me to tell had become the chains they used to bind me. Every deception I'd made to preserve my sanity had been added to their arsenal of reasons why I couldn't be trusted with freedom. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, but trapped in a prison of their making with bars forged from my own desperate attempts to experience normal life. The strict parenting that was supposed to make me successful had instead made me an expert liar, and those lies had now become the justification for taking away my future. The saddest part was that everything they'd feared, that I would make bad decisions, that I would prioritize social activities over academics, that I would be corrupted by normal teenage experiences, had been proven false. Despite all my lying and secret social activities, I'd still maintained excellent grades, stayed out of serious trouble, and developed into a responsible young adult. But they couldn't see that because they were too focused on the deception itself to notice what I'd actually accomplished. They couldn't acknowledge that their fears had been unfounded because that would mean admitting their methods had been wrong. My lying had been a symptom of their controlling behavior, but they'd turned it into evidence that more control was needed. They'd created the very problem they claimed to be solving, then used that problem to justify their continued abuse. As I sat in my room that night, looking at college acceptance letters I'd never be allowed to use, I realized that strict parents don't create the best liars by accident. They create them systematically, deliberately, by making honesty too dangerous to risk. And then they use those lies to destroy their children's futures, all while convincing themselves they're doing it out of love. The truth was worse than anything they could have imagined. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what they'd turned me into. They'd taken an honest, trusting child and molded her into someone who couldn't tell them the truth about anything. But the most devastating part was that even after seeing the results of their methods, they'd learned nothing. Instead of questioning why their child felt compelled to lie to them, they doubled down on the very behaviors that had created the problem in the first place. They'd won, in a way. They'd successfully isolated me from every influence except theirs, controlled every aspect of my life, and ensured that I would never again risk being honest with them about anything that mattered. But their victory had cost them their daughter. The person sitting in that room on her 18th birthday wasn't the child they'd raised. She was a stranger they'd created through years of systematic emotional abuse disguised as strict parenting. And the worst part was that they'd convinced themselves this was love.